Hi, I'm Camille. I closed a $2.5 billion deal that was supposed to define my career. But when the lights came on, my father took the mic and called me a legal assistant. Said my sister was the visionary. I didn't correct him. I just touched one button, clause 1017A, and watched the system recognize the real author. Ever had your legacy stolen by your own family while they smiled for the cameras? Stay with me. You're about to see what silence, precision, and one quiet clause can really do. They said the room would hold 200 people, but it felt like twice that with the cameras, the lights, the nerves. I stood near the podium, notes in hand, the projection behind me flashing "Welcome to a New Era" in bold navy letters. My name was on every document, every slide. I had spent 9 months hammering out this deal with Evermain Global through 3 continents, 24 lawyers, and one all-nighter that nearly cost me my hearing in my left ear. But it was worth it. Brightcap Ventures was about to go global. My life's work was about to be recognized. I adjusted my blazer charcoal gray, tailored to the inch. My assistant had triple-checked every slide. The coffee was perfect. My hands were steady. I was ready. Until the double doors at the end of the conference hall opened. He was 22 minutes late. My father, Lawrence Prescott, founder and chairman of Brightcap, still walked like he owned every square foot of carpet his shoes touched. And right beside him, perfectly timed, perfectly styled, came Tessa. Her white suit sparkled under the recessed lighting. Red heels, hair slicked back like she had stepped off a Silicon Valley billboard. She smiled just the right amount. Not too proud, not too humble. The cameras caught every angle. Lawrence walked straight to the stage like it had been waiting for him, took the mic from the stand and tapped it twice like he was opening a family barbecue. "Sorry for the delay," he said. "Traffic was a beast. But we made it just in time for a historic announcement." I blinked. Announcement. This deal, he continued, this unprecedented leap forward, this strategic alliance with Evermain Global. None of it would have been possible without the vision, the leadership, the bold creativity of one woman. My fingers tightened around the clicker in my right hand. This was not in the script. Lawrence turned one arm, sweeping toward Tessa as she climbed the stage. "Let us all give a round of applause for my daughter Tessa Prescott, the future of Brightcap Ventures." Applause followed. Not roaring, but enough. Some board members clapped hesitantly. A few glanced at me. One of them, the CFO, I think, looked genuinely confused. And, of course, Lawrence added with a chuckle, "None of this would have been possible without the diligent support of our in-house legal advisor, Camille Prescott." That was it. 365 days of strategizing, rewriting, mediating, redlining documents in hotel lobbies, all compressed into one vague label: legal advisor. Not even chief counsel. Just support. The air in the room seemed to change density. I saw Tessa flash me a rehearsed smile as she took the mic. She began speaking, tossing in tech buzzwords like confetti at a parade. She called Evermain's CEO George instead of Greg. Referred to the merger as an acquisition. Quoted a market stat from 2020 like it was current. No one stopped her. I sat down slowly, my mind no longer on her words. My body moved like it belonged to someone else. I rested my tablet on my lap and tilted the screen just enough so it would not reflect off the overhead lights. Clause 1017, still there. Still dormant. I had written it 7 years ago after a failed acquisition in Zurich where half our internal infrastructure was exposed because someone forgot to vet the access protocols. I was told the clause was paranoid. Overkill. Even Mallory in IT had laughed, called it Camille's doomsday button. But I embedded it anyway, quietly, neatly, legally. It had passed compliance because no one read fine print when it was buried in something as boring as infrastructure updates. The clause did exactly one thing. It froze Brightcap's high-level operational systems and rerouted legal control of any pending transaction to a neutral third-party entity. Triggered by biometric ID and a 4-word passphrase only I knew. It was not revenge. It was insurance. I looked toward the stage again. Tessa's voice cracked as she tried to explain our multi-region rollout. Her eyes darted toward the front row. She knew she was losing them. I watched one of the Evermain directors check his watch. I was not angry. Not really. I had passed that point years ago, sometime between our mother's funeral and my 15th proposal being renamed under Tessa's brand initiative. This was not new. It was just finally public. They wanted her in the spotlight. Let them have the spotlight. I watched the timer on my tablet tick forward. I did not touch the button. Not yet. But I let my finger hover. The room smelled like floral arrangements and filtered air. No one was watching me now. They were too busy watching her sink under the weight of a crown she did not understand. And when I finally tapped the screen, the system did not crash. It simply blinked. And then one by one the lights began to flicker. At first, no one noticed. The lights dimmed just slightly, like a power fluctuation too subtle to register. But then the projector behind Tessa froze mid-transition, the words "Global Integration Strategy" lingering in a broken frame. A soft chime echoed from the speaker system, 3 short tones followed by silence. The kind of silence that tightens a room. Tessa paused her hand midair as she gestured toward the frozen screen. "Apologies," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "It looks like we're experiencing a brief technical hiccup." She tried to continue, but the microphone in her hand let out a high-pitched feedback squeal before cutting off completely. She tapped it once, twice, then looked down at the podium where the control panel had gone dark. The wall of monitors behind the press table shifted from static graphics to black. Then, in thick red letters, a banner appeared across every display: "Unauthorized system access." All streaming feeds to Evermain's satellite offices dropped. Live captions vanished. A murmur spread across the room. Someone from the Paris delegation leaned toward his translator. "Is this part of the demo?" a woman near the back whispered. "Is this a cybersecurity test?" The contract portal screens at each executive's seat began to blink. One by one, the tablets issued a sharp ping followed by "access denied." "Signatory breach detected." Still, I said nothing. I sat with my tablet closed on my lap, hands folded over the screen like it had never been touched. Lawrence stood up slowly. At first, he looked confused, turning to one of the IT staff in the corner of the room. But when they shrugged helplessly, he pushed back his chair with a loud scrape and marched toward the stage. "What the hell is going on?" No one answered. The tension in the room turned solid. Tessa looked down at her frozen teleprompter, then back at the crowd. Her eyes scanned the faces, searching for someone to rescue her from the spotlight that had suddenly become an interrogation lamp. She tried again, her voice cracking. "I'm sure our tech team will have that back up in just a second." The second never came. Her gaze landed on me briefly, then darted away. Lawrence turned to the closest assistant. "Where's Mallory? Why is no one fixing this?" The assistant stepped back, clearly panicked. "Sir, she's not in the room. She's monitoring from systems command." "Then go get her," Lawrence barked, eyes narrowing. I stood slowly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "Thank you all for your patience. Unfortunately, due to a security contingency, we'll be postponing the remainder of this presentation." Lawrence rounded on me. "Camille, what did you do?" I met his stare without blinking. "You'll need someone higher than the legal advisor for that." And I turned and walked out. The room didn't erupt. It didn't have to. The silence followed me like a shadow, heavy and reverent, like something sacred had just cracked. As I passed through the back corridor, I could hear whispered fragments. Did she just pull the plug? Was that an internal override? She just walked out. No one moved to stop me. Not security, not staff. Even the press seemed too stunned to lift a camera. I moved steadily, each step echoing off the polished floor, the buzz of failing electronics still humming behind me like the aftershock of a distant explosion. I took the elevator to the second floor, punched in my credentials, and stepped into the system's command suite. Mallory Chen was already there, seated behind a row of monitors glowing with back-end diagnostics. "You triggered it," she said, without looking away from the screens. "Clause 10.17, a fully engaged." Her voice was calm, clinical. Not surprise, just confirmation. I nodded. "Audit log, active. Live. You want a readout?" "Not yet." I walked around to the glass wall that overlooked the lower levels. From up here, I could see the backs of the boardroom chairs, the silhouettes of people still frozen in confusion. The livestream control panel had gone completely dark. Mallory tapped a few keys. No breach detected. Encryption holding, external access frozen, communications firewalled. Legal authority rerouted through the Maris and Valen entity per your parameters. She turned and looked at me for the first time. It's airtight. That clause was art. I gave a faint smile, not joy. Not pride. Just relief. I didn't do it to destroy Brightcap, I did it to remind them who built it. Because for years I had watched them take my work, slap a newer name on it, hand it to Tessa, and call it Vision. Because I had lost sleep, lost time, lost whole seasons of my life trying to keep this company afloat while they rehearsed speeches and posed for press kits. Because even today, even now, they thought I would sit in the second row and clap for the girl with the better wardrobe. I turned back to Mallory. Full lockdown remains in place until I say otherwise. Anyone tries to override, trigger a level 3 alert. She nodded. Already set. Good. I glanced once more at the control feed where Lawrence's face was now framed in a frozen livestream loop. His mouth was open mid-sentence, his eyes wide. He looked like a man who just realized the kingdom he thought he ruled had been built on borrowed land. I stepped away from the glass. Let them scramble. Let them run scenarios. Let them call emergency meetings. They had just entered a game they didn't even know I had invented. And I hadn't even played my final move. I moved to the far terminal and logged into the secondary console. The biometric scanner flashed once, then green. A calm voice echoed from the speaker. Administrator confirmed. Override complete. Systems under singular control. I exhaled slow and controlled as the dashboard lit up in front of me. The clause had executed cleanly. No conflict, no errors. It hadn't just paused the company. It had rerouted its legal heart to me. Every active transaction, every pending contract, every executive action above Tier 2 now required my fingerprint or my voice print. The power wasn't symbolic. It was structural. Mallory stood beside me, arms folded. Your father's signature approving this clause is still on file. Time-stamped. Legal. He can scream about sabotage all he wants, but we both know this isn't a breach. This is protocol. He signed it himself, I said. Back in fiscal year 2016, he didn't read the infrastructure memo. He never did. She gave a faint chuckle. Classic Prescott. I let my eyes move across the screen. From this control suite, I could see the ripple effects in real time. Vendor lines paused. Payroll queries suspended. The Evermain integration module had locked down halfway through syncing. I saw someone try to relaunch the presentation platform from a conference laptop only for it to bounce back with a level 4 denial code. The system didn't ask for help. It simply didn't allow access. Good, I said quietly. Mallory turned toward me. You want me to inform the board? Not yet. Let them stew for a while. I want them to feel the imbalance. Camille, I looked over. This was clean. Ruthless but clean. I've worked in systems security for 23 years. I've never seen anything this well built, this buried. It's not just brilliant. It's surgical. That word made me pause. Surgical. I hadn't thought of it that way. But she was right. This clause wasn't vengeance with a flamethrower. It was precision with a scalpel. I had written it on a sleepless weekend during a leadership summit in Arizona back when I still believed I had to earn my father's attention. He had left me off the speaking schedule, said the legal department didn't need a voice in vision planning. So I sat in my hotel suite with 3 monitors and a compliance manual, and I wrote a backdoor into every level of executive authority. It had been reviewed, approved, and embedded in the next routine update without anyone asking why a contingency clause needed a biometric gate. Because no one thought the assistant would ever need it. I looked down at my hand. The same hand that had signed the Evermain contract. The same hand that had drawn up the merger outline, redlined the cross-jurisdictional provisions, and negotiated the intellectual property protections clause by clause. Tessa hadn't written a single line of it. She hadn't even been on the plane to Zurich. Mallory tapped another sequence and brought up a live feed of the boardroom from the security camera above the east exit. The resolution was crisp. You could see every twitch, every fake smile. Lawrence was pacing. His suit jacket had come off. His shirt was untucked at the back. I hadn't seen him like that since the day our internal audit uncovered $3 million in misrouted tech funding. Tessa sat in the front row. Her hands were wrapped tightly around a water bottle, the label shredded into small strips on the floor beside her chair. Her face was pale. They weren't confused anymore. They were exposed. Mallory pointed to the bottom of the screen. We've got 24 system access attempts in the last 10 minutes. None cleared tier 1. All failed. Any attempts from Tessa's tablet 4, all flagged. All logged. Good. I closed the monitor. For now, let them think the building is on fire. Let them wonder where the extinguisher is. When they finally ask who installed the alarm system, I'll answer. Mallory raised a brow. You want me to prepare a full audit trail? Yes. Watermarked, time-stamped. Legal chain of custody intact. On it. I walked toward the window. From here, Seattle looked gray, glassy, all cold sky and steel. The city had been my proving ground. My battleground. My inheritance. They had tried to paint me out of the picture. Again. But I was never just a corner piece. And this time I was the frame. Behind me I heard the system hum again, a quiet recalibration of access layers realigning under one name. Mine. Mallory's voice came softly. They're going to come for this. You know that. I nodded. Let them. My voice didn't shake. Not because I wasn't nervous, but because I'd already survived the hardest part. Being invisible while carrying the weight. Now I had a name, a signature, a clause. And they had a room full of blank screens. By the time I stepped outside, the sun had not yet broken through the marine layer. The morning light was pale, washed out, the kind of colorless haze that made everything feel unreal. I didn't go home. I didn't want comfort or closure. I just walked. Around the block. Twice. Then I ended up at the public garden across from the old Columbia Tower, staring at the fountain I used to sit beside when I was an intern. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, then it buzzed again, this time with a text. She's in the car. Unresponsive. You're listed as primary contact. I froze. Tessa. I didn't think, just moved. My heels hit pavement like gunshots, fast and sharp. The parking structure beneath the main Brightcap Tower was swarming with staff. 2 security guards stood near a black coupe angled awkwardly across 2 spots. The engine was off. The driver's window was cracked open just an inch. Someone had pulled the door handle. It wasn't locked. She was slumped in the seat, hair matted to her temple, makeup streaked like she had slept in a mask that melted overnight. Her blazer, the same one from yesterday, was wrinkled at the sleeves, her hands still gripping the steering wheel like she had tried to keep control and failed mid-motion. Is she breathing? One of the interns hovered close but didn't dare reach in. I stepped forward without a word and placed 2 fingers against her neck. Pulse but weak. Shallow. I stepped back. Call it in. Now. An ambulance arrived within 6 minutes. It felt longer. No one spoke to me as the paramedics lifted her onto a stretcher, but someone handed me her bag and murmured something about emergency contact protocol. Her phone was dead. Her ID still clipped to her lapel. They asked if I was family. Yes, I said. That was all it took. At the hospital, I sat in a stiff chair across from the nurse's station, the smell of antiseptic and burnt coffee sinking into my coat. A muted television played morning news. No coverage yet of the outage. Just local weather and footage of a raccoon loose on a school bus. The nurse handed me a clipboard. You're listed here. She'll need someone to speak with the attending once she's stable. Stable. The word felt strange. It didn't fit with the image I had in my head. Tessa curled like a child in the front seat of her car, shaking beneath her perfect suit. The doctor approached 10 minutes later. Blue scrubs. Exhausted eyes. She's awake, some disorientation. Blood pressure was dangerously high, likely from sustained stress. We'll keep her for observation. Any known history, I hesitated. Would sibling rivalry count? She's had. Pressure. Expectations. The doctor nodded like he'd heard that before. Happens more than people think. Especially in legacy families. The brain can only carry so much performance weight before the body decides it's done pretending. He gestured for me to follow him. She's asking for you. I walked into the room. Tessa was lying flat, her eyes half-lidded, and Ivy in her arm monitors beeping softly in rhythm with a heart that once beat loud enough to take over boardrooms. Her voice came out cracked and barely audible. I wasn't ready. I didn't move closer. For the room, she said. The room looked at me and I didn't know who I was supposed to be. I said nothing. She looked toward the ceiling. Dad said just smile and let them believe. That the story would carry itself. That no one reads the footnotes. Her hand twitched against the blanket. I didn't offer to hold it. He said you wouldn't stop me. Still I didn't speak. I just stood there, arms crossed, watching her come apart, not in a conference, not in a courtroom, but here. Under fluorescent lights with no makeup crew, no PR filter. And it wasn't rage I felt. It was recognition. She had spent her whole life performing a role. A role they wrote for her. The visionary. The next-gen leader. The golden heir. And I had been the understudy who memorized all her lines in case she ever missed a cue. I remembered the scholarship banquet when I was 16. I had been slated to give the keynote. My essay had won first place. 10 minutes before I went on stage, someone spilled cranberry juice down the front of my dress. I didn't see who. But Tessa was the one already waiting backstage in a second copy of the program with her name printed over mine. I had asked Mom what happened. She just said maybe next time I'd be more careful. That was the moment I stopped expecting rescue. Now years later, I stood at her hospital bed and didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. She mumbled again. It's all too much. Then she closed her eyes and drifted somewhere between sleep and surrender. I left the room without another word. In the hallway, I leaned against the cold tile wall and stared at my shoes. Black leather slightly scuffed from pacing. Mallory texted me. Board emergency session scheduled. Friday. Full attendance expected. I typed a single word back. Confirmed. Tessa wasn't the only one who had a role to play. But unlike her, I had written mine myself. The apartment was still when I stepped in. No emails, no missed calls, just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the creak of the wood floor under my heels. I dropped my keys into the tray by the door, peeled off my blazer, and stood for a long moment in the dim light of the hallway. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel much at all. On the kitchen counter sat a small leather envelope, deep burgundy, sealed with maroon wax stamped in a crest I hadn't seen in years. A falcon over crossed oak branches. My grandfather's seal. I didn't move to open it right away. I just stared at it. I hadn't seen that emblem since the week of his funeral. He only used it for personal matters, never corporate. Not for contracts, not for financial statements. Only 4 letters in my life had ever come with that crest. 3 were written to my mother. 1 was for me. The envelope was hand-delivered, the address in Malcolm Foster's handwriting. He had once been Russell Prescott's personal attorney. A man of few words and meticulous legal memory. If he sent something, it wasn't trivial. I walked to the living room, sat down with the envelope in my lap, and slowly broke the seal. Inside was a single document and a folded handwritten letter. I unfolded the document first. It was dated the 3rd of March 3 years ago. A notarized codicil to Russell's original trust. In the event of executive misconduct, ethical violation, or reputational compromise within Brightcap Ventures, full controlling interest shall transfer to the designated heir outlined in Addendum D, effective immediately upon legal confirmation of said breach. I flipped to Addendum D. Designated heir Camille Prescott. My breath didn't catch, my chest didn't tighten. Instead, I felt something expand inside me, like a spine straightening after years of slouching, like an old knot loosening. I turned to the letter. His handwriting was as precise as I remembered. Sharp lines, slight rightward tilt, firm pressure on every downstroke. It read like he was still speaking to me across his mahogany desk, the room smelling faintly of cedar oil and chamomile tea. Camille, if you're reading this, then someone has finally made enough noise to require your silence no longer. You were never second. You were simply quiet. I regret the moments I let others write the narrative. I regret letting your father believe spotlight meant succession. But I never mistook charm for character. I watched. I listened. And I trusted you. This clause is not a gift. It is a responsibility. Do not use it for vengeance. Use it for clarity. Let truth guide your hand even if your heart falters. Russell, I read it twice. Then a third time. Still I didn't cry. I folded the letter back along its original creases carefully, like it might bruise, if handled too roughly. I placed it back in the envelope, then leaned back in my chair, staring up at the ceiling. 3 years. He had written this 3 years ago, before the Evermain deal. Before the internal clawback scandal. Before Tessa's face appeared on the front page of Forbes under the headline "Brightcap's Rising Star." He knew. He had known what was coming, he had seen what none of them did, and he had planned for it. Not with a press release. Not with a speech. But with a single paragraph buried in a trust no one ever bothered to read. I stood, walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stared out the window at the city below. Seattle's skyline blinked back at me, cold and unbothered. Then I picked up my phone and dialed. Malcolm answered on the second ring. "Camille. It's me," I said. I figured. I saw the courier confirmation. I held the phone tighter. "File it. Quietly. No press, no leaks." "You're sure?" "Yes. There's no walking it back once it's submitted." "I don't want to walk it back." He paused. "Understood. I'll begin processing in the morning." I hung up without saying goodbye. In the silence that followed, I stood still, the glass of water untouched on the counter beside me. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to their choices. I was following a path someone had carved just for me. Not because I was loud, not because I was flashy, but because I could carry it without needing the world to watch. I turned off the kitchen light, walked back into the living room, and stared one more time at the folded letter. Let truth guide your hand even if your heart falters. And I knew. It already had. The next morning I arrived at the office 2 hours before anyone else. The corridors were silent, carpet muted underfoot. I took the service elevator straight to the compliance floor. No one stopped me. No one needed to. Cassandra Greer and Min Kwan were already in the secured audit room, just like I had requested. Cassandra had been with Brightcap for over a decade, a senior systems analyst with a mind like a steel trap. Min was younger, newer, but laser-focused and disarmingly thorough. Neither of them cared about corporate politics. They respected protocols, not personalities. I placed the encrypted drive on the table between us. All system logs from the last 18 months. Chain of custody intact. Metadata preserved. No edits. Cassandra plugged it into the workstation. Min started scanning the root directories. What exactly are we looking for? Attempts to access high-clearance folders within the last 72 hours. Also, any override authorizations tied to my clause. Min's eyes narrowed as he tapped away. You think someone tried to tamper with the clause? I don't think. I know. I just need the system to show it. The screen blinked as lines of code scrolled past. Cassandra leaned in. Got one. 2, actually. Both from the same device ID. Labeled under tprescott@brightcap.com. She opened the logs. First attempt was at 5:16 a.m. on the morning of the press event. Target folder legacy compliance tier 4 encryption. Denied. Second attempt 15 minutes later. Different path. Same result. Min whistled under his breath. Why would she be poking around tier 4 folders hours before a presentation she wasn't supposed to lead? Because she knew I built something she couldn't fake. Cassandra brought up the device map. Both attempts left digital fingerprints. Nothing was deleted. She didn't know enough to cover her tracks. Min leaned back in his chair. That's sloppy. That's desperation, I said. I pointed to another entry. That override authorization. Open it. They pulled up the file. Tessa's credentials were listed, but the override key didn't originate from her account. It came from a master executive profile. Lawrence's Cassandra blinked. This signature was uploaded 12 months ago, which means he pre-approved her access to files she wasn't supposed to touch. That's a breach of chain of command. And a violation of our internal ethics code, Cassandra added. It bypasses internal review and compliance firewall. That's not just bad practice. That's grounds for automatic review. Min looked over at me. You want this sent to internal legal number. Send it to the board secretary. And post the summary findings on the compliance archive. No names. Just logs. Timestamps. System origin. That'll rattle the tree. Good. I'm done warning people in private. Cassandra gave a short nod and began generating the summary file. I stepped out of the room for a moment and walked down the hall. The early light from the east windows stretched across the marble, throwing long shadows between the columns. I had once believed that the truth needed a spotlight, but sometimes the truth didn't need volume. Sometimes it just needed visibility. I remembered Tessa on the stage, mic trembling in her hand. I remembered my father patting my shoulder like I was a secretary bringing coffee. And I remembered every email they BCC'd me on when I had drafted the entire deal. They erased me with smiles, with headlines, with subtle omissions. Now I would answer with documentation. Min called out from down the hall. Camille, you should see this. I walked back into the room. He had pulled up an old audit trail dated 14 months ago. Check this out. This is when the clause was reaffirmed by legal and buried under the systems upgrade you ordered. It's still watermarked with full board sign-off. It passed every layer of scrutiny. And the board didn't even know what they were signing, Cassandra added. Because they didn't ask. They never ask when it comes wrapped in efficiency metrics and compliance language. She clicked again and a new window opened. System lineage confirms the override was never triggered prior to yesterday. First live engagement was timestamped at 10:41 a.m. Your tablet. Your fingerprint. So we have full legality. Full authority. No breach, no tampering. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Let's finalize the post. No edits. No spin. Just system records. Cassandra nodded. Want a press liaison number? Let the board read it first. The ones who need to know will. Min watched me closely. This isn't just about the clause, is it number? It's about the pattern. They taught me to play quiet. To work behind the scenes. To be the steady hand behind the curtain. But what they never counted on was that I'd build the curtain myself. And that I'd know exactly where the seams were when it was time to pull it down. The sun had just cleared the edge of the Puget Sound when my phone buzzed again. Blocked number. I ignored the first call. When it rang a second time, I picked up. Camille said, the voice on the other end, low, familiar, and too composed to be casual. I almost didn't recognize it until he added, we need to talk. Today. Ethan Rowe. It had been nearly 6 years since we'd spoken. 6 years since he walked away from both our relationship and his investigation into Brightcap's media strategies. But his voice still had that same directness, like every sentence was meant to be typed in bold. How did you get this number? You changed yours. I didn't. I figured you'd answer if it came through blocked. I stayed quiet, he continued. I have something you need to see. Meet me at the old ferry terminal. No press. No trail. Then the line went dead. I should have ignored it. I should have gone back to prepping the board briefing and finalizing the memo Cassandra and Min were drafting. But I knew Ethan. If he was reaching out now, it wasn't nostalgia. It was strategy. An hour later, I pulled into the lot by the ferry pier, the one we used to escape to when the city got too loud and the headlines too heavy. He was already there, leaning against the hood of a dusty silver hybrid, holding a manila envelope and 2 coffees. You still don't text, I said, stepping out of my car. And you still show up exactly 7 minutes early, he replied, holding out one of the cups. No cream, no sugar. I took it more out of habit than thanks. What is this? He tapped the envelope against his palm. Proof that your father built your sister's legacy out of smoke and credit cards. He handed me the file. Inside were screenshots, transaction logs, and a printed spreadsheet cross-referencing payments from Brightcap's discretionary fund to a boutique PR firm in Austin. Names I recognized, publications that had run glowing features on Tessa's leadership-style startup instincts and award-winning foresight. "These are paid placements," I said. "All of them. Disguised as editorial. They even built fake author profiles to give the pieces more credibility." I flipped to the next page. It showed an invoice for a staged video series complete with studio rental, ghostwritten interview questions, and influencer packages targeting emerging tech leadership narratives. The client name listed wasn't Tessa. It was a shell entity called Crescent Banner LLC. "We traced that LLC back to a holding company under your father's personal trust," Ethan said, reading my expression. "And the director of that holding company is Tessa's former college roommate. The one who never actually graduated." My hands tightened around the folder. "How long have you had this?" "I've been piecing it together since last fall. But it wasn't enough until now. Not without what you did yesterday. You're telling me they manufactured her entire media image? Not just image. Awards. Speaking invites. Even the TEDx spot. The audience was paid. Half the attendees were interns from a casting agency in Oakland." I laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "And the board bought it. They didn't ask. That's how lies stay alive." He pulled out another sheet, a signed expense authorization from Lawrence dated 14 months ago. The signature matched the one on the override clause. Same pen stroke, same careless confidence. "That ties it together," Ethan said. "Misuse of company funds for personal brand elevation. Coordinated deception to inflate investor confidence. This isn't just PR malpractice. This is securities fraud." I closed the folder and looked at him. "Do you have enough to take it to the SEC?" He nodded. "I've already got a contact in their enforcement division reviewing the first wave. They're waiting on a green light from you to go deeper." I didn't answer right away. I looked out at the ferry pulling into the dock, the slow churn of water beneath it. That vessel had been crossing this bay longer than I'd been alive. Back and forth. No shortcuts, just motion. "You know this will set off a storm," I said. Ethan shrugged. "Camille, you're already in the eye of it." I took a slow breath. "This isn't about revenge." "It never was," he said. "It's about correction." We stood there for a moment, two people who had once built a life around ambition and truth, and then lost each other in the wreckage. There was no apology between us, just understanding. "You still chasing Pulitzers?" I asked. He smiled, but there was no ego in it. "Number. Just stories worth finishing." I held out my hand. "Then let's finish this one." We shook. His grip was firm. Final. We weren't partners anymore. Not in the way we used to be. But we were aligned. He passed me a USB drive before turning to go. "Everything's mirrored here, including backup voice memos and timelines. Just in case someone tries to make it all disappear." I nodded. "Thank you. You don't owe me that, maybe not. But I'm saying it anyway." He got in his car and pulled away without another word. I stood there, the wind tugging at the hem of my coat, the drive warm in my palm. They had built an empire on illusion. Now the truth had weight. Evidence. Names. Dates. And it was coming for them. Not with headlines, but with consequences. That night I couldn't sleep. Not from adrenaline or fear. It was something quieter. Like the silence right before the tide changes. The kind of stillness that doesn't ask questions but dares you to face your own answers. I found myself walking into the attic. The house I kept was functional modern, but the attic narrow stairs, cedar panels, dust clinging to the corners held memories I rarely touched. My mother's boxes were stacked beneath the eaves untouched since the day we cleared her belongings after the funeral. I'd kept them out of obligation, not sentiment. Or at least that's what I used to tell myself. I knelt down and pulled the top box toward me. Inside were photo albums, yellowed programs from piano recitals, a strand of pearls I hadn't seen since I was 17. Her handwriting still marked some of the envelopes, looping cursive, confident but gentle. I shifted aside an old scarf and uncovered a smaller box at the bottom. It was wooden with a faded velvet lining and one rusted latch. I clicked it open and found a stack of folded letters tied with twine. Most were addressed to my father. But one had my name. To Camille. Not for now, but for when it matters. I didn't recognize the stationery. It wasn't fancy. Just soft off-white paper like the kind she used to scribble grocery lists on. I hesitated before opening it. Her voice filled the room the moment I read the first line. Camille. By the time you read this, I imagine some truth will have already found you. Or worse, it hasn't, and you're still wondering if anyone ever really saw you. I need you to know your silence was never invisible to me. You weren't loud, you weren't theatrical, but you were always there. Always watching, always steady. You didn't need applause to prove you were strong. But I should have told you more often you were. You are. My hands trembled slightly as I flipped the page. There will come a day when the room turns against you. Maybe not in anger, but in omission. They will raise others higher and call it fairness. You will be told to wait your turn to support, to advise. They will name your quiet a flaw. They will praise someone else for standing in a spotlight you built. I felt something in my throat tighten. When that happens, remember this. Your grandfather saw you. Not just loved you, saw you. He told me once that you listen like a judge and build like an architect. That's why he chose you. Not because you demanded power, but because you knew what to do when it finally arrived. I blinked quickly, forcing the blur out of my eyes. You will be pushed to the edge. Maybe even out of frame. But Camille, you were never background. Not to me. Not to him. And when the time comes when you must decide whether to speak or stay silent, trust yourself. Trust that being quiet was never the same as being weak. I love you. I always have. Mom, I didn't cry. I sat there, the letter open on my lap as the attic stillness closed around me. The world didn't shift. The wind didn't rise. But something in me settled. She knew. She had known long before the clauses, the conferences, the corrections. She saw what they didn't. And even if she hadn't said it in time to stop the damage, she'd still found a way to leave something behind that mattered. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my blazer pocket. The one I planned to wear on Friday. Downstairs, the city lights flickered like fireflies trapped behind glass. I poured a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and pulled my laptop closer. The file from Ethan still sat in my inbox untouched. I opened it. I began tagging each document by category, by timestamp, by source. Financial manipulation. Media fraud. Internal access breach. I didn't rush. I didn't even flinch. I was cataloging what was already true. By midnight, I had labeled every file and created a mirrored archive on an external drive. At 12:37 a.m., I sent one message. To board secretary, subject for Friday's review. Attachments 14. I leaned back in my chair. I had proof. I had legal standing. I had my name on every line that mattered, but more than that, I had confirmation. Quiet and personal. That I had been seen. Even once. And sometimes once was enough. ChatGPT Darnay. 3 days later, a black government SUV pulled up to the private entrance of Brightcap's downtown tower. The woman who stepped out was in her late 40s, short silver-streaked hair tucked neatly behind one ear, a crisp navy pantsuit with a Justice Department ID clipped to the lapel. Her stride was confident but unhurried, her presence quiet but unmistakable. Karen Dunley, lead enforcement officer from the SEC's Division of Corporate Finance. She introduced herself with a firm handshake and little small talk. Her eyes were steady, the kind of gaze that didn't flinch when someone tried to spin the truth sideways. "We received your full submission," she said. "I'm not here to interrogate you. I'm here to verify the systems and confirm what your documents suggest. Full cooperation would be appreciated." "You'll have it," I said. I escorted her and her 2 associates to the secured audit room. Mallory was already there, as was Min. Cassandra joined 10 minutes later with 2 laptops and a mirrored copy of our internal logs. We sat in silence for the first 15 minutes as Karen reviewed the network map. She didn't rush. She didn't ask obvious questions. She let the documents speak first. Once she finished scanning the digital overview, she spoke again. What we're looking at, Miss Prescott, is a multi-layered pattern of internal misrepresentation. These fund transfers labeled as community outreach were routed through shell vendors. These media campaigns lack standard disclaimers and were paid through discretionary channels with no board review. This override access here is the most concerning. The digital signature tied to Lawrence Prescott bypassed chain of command and gave access to an executive-level override tool. She turned the monitor slightly. That tool is yours, correct? Yes. I built it years ago as a contingency clause. It was never designed to be accessed without a biometric key. Lawrence forced an override by signing access to Tessa preemptively. That alone violates Brightcap's internal compliance protocols and likely sections of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Karen nodded without expression. You've remained silent about this for how long? 7 years. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Why now? Because silence isn't safety, it's erosion. And they finally asked me to disappear one too many times. She didn't comment. She just opened another folder. Over the next 6 hours, my team provided full back-end access. We handed over employee logs, vendor, contracts, even the original metadata from the Evermain negotiation chain. Karen reviewed each without dramatics. She simply highlighted inconsistencies and handed them to her associate for timestamping. At one point, she paused on an expense report labeled Public Image Strategy Q4 and traced the routing code back to a side account under a different branch of Lawrence's investment trust. This is layered, not careless. It was meant to be, I said. That's how long-standing systems maintain control through polish, not panic. She nodded again, this time almost approvingly. We broke for 20 minutes in the late afternoon. I sat alone in the small side conference room and stared at the skyline. The company name still glinted on the tower across the courtyard. Brightcap. It used to mean power. Now it looked like a hollowed-out shell of itself. When the SEC team returned, Karen looked at me directly. I'll be filing an interim report with the commission by Friday. Based on what we've seen, formal action is likely. You've done your part, Miss Prescott. You'll be asked to give a closed deposition and supply a signed affidavit. After that, it leaves your hands. I understand. If I may ask. She added, you've avoided speaking publicly. No press. No statements. That's rare. I don't want noise. I want correction. She studied me a moment longer, then extended her hand. Thank you for your cooperation. They left as quietly as they arrived. I returned to my office. The emails had already started. Board members looking for clarification. Staff whispering about an audit. A junior associate forwarded me an internal Slack screenshot. Someone had posted the SEC badge sighting with 3 eye emojis. But I didn't reply to any of it. I drafted no memos. I made no announcements. Instead, I spent the rest of the evening reviewing quarterly projections and rewriting the compliance training protocols. I had no interest in revenge porn. No appetite for scandal. I didn't want applause. I wanted order. Tessa hadn't returned to the office. Lawrence hadn't called. No one made a statement to the press. But the silence was different now. It wasn't neglect. It was weight. And slowly, quietly, the corridors of Brightcap began to feel different. Department heads no longer CC'd my father on every decision. The legal team requested a private review of all past contracts with the Prescott name attached. Facilities removed the Prescott Family Hall of Legacy display from the first-floor gallery without instruction. No protest, no ceremony, just motion. And I didn't stop them. Because I never wanted a crown. Just a clear table. One where the work could finally stand without needing a name to hold it up. And one by one, the pillars built on fiction began to come down. Friday morning, the boardroom smelled like lemon oil and quiet dread. I arrived at 8:57, not a minute early. Malcolm Foster walked beside me, briefcase in hand, his expression unreadable. He had been my grandfather's legal counsel for over 30 years. Today, he was here for me. We stepped into the room together. Every chair around the long oak table was occupied except for one. My father's Frieder, Teeter. It remained empty, the leather seat untouched, the glass of water beside it still sweating condensation as if someone had just stepped away. Tessa was there though. She sat at the far end of the table, posture, two straight hands clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't look at me. I didn't look at her either. The chair at the head of the table remained open. I didn't hesitate. I walked the full length of the room and took my seat. Malcolm placed the briefcase on the table and opened it slowly. 3 folders. 1 envelope. A slim black drive. "Mr. Foster," the chairman said, adjusting his glasses, "I assume you've come prepared to present the documentation." Malcolm gave a short nod. "Yes. Pursuant to Article 12 of the Brightcap Ventures Corporate Charter and reinforced by the private trust documentation signed by Russell Prescott, I am here to confirm the legitimacy of Ms. Camille Prescott's current executive authority. All documents have been notarized and cross-filed with the Prescott Estate Review Office." He passed the first folder down the table. Inside was the codicil my grandfather had written. The one that transferred operational control to me in the event of executive misconduct or ethical breach. Malcolm continued, tone calm, precise. "Additionally, Ms. Prescott has submitted verified system logs showing unauthorized override access granted by Lawrence Prescott to a non-cleared party, as well as falsified vendor payments and media contracts in violation of internal and federal compliance. These have been shared with the Securities and Exchange Commission." The room didn't speak. Pages turned, brows furrowed. Malcolm passed the second folder. "This contains metadata, signed approvals, and timestamps validating that the system lockdown clause was activated by Ms. Prescott within full legal bounds. No external breach occurred. The system responded exactly as designed." He passed the third. "Here you'll find staff affidavits, including from the lead systems engineer and head of compliance, attesting that the override was not only legitimate but necessary." Finally, he held up the envelope. "This letter, written by Russell Prescott and sealed 3 years ago, confirms his intent that Camille Prescott be recognized as the successor to the chair in the event that leadership within the firm compromises the company's ethics, financial integrity, or public trust." He handed it to the chairman, then stepped back without another word. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, it was reflective. The kind of silence that comes when truth doesn't need to shout. One by one, the board members looked up. Not at Malcolm. At me. A senior member, Mr. Hanford, cleared his throat. "I've reviewed all supporting documents. In light of the recent findings and this trust documentation, I support the motion to confirm Ms. Prescott's executive authority effective immediately." Another member stood. "Miss Beale." She didn't speak, she simply nodded. A third rose, Wes McAdams. A man who had never once called me by my first name in public. He spoke directly, not unkindly. "You didn't ask for applause, Camille. You asked for accountability. That speaks louder to me than anything I've read in a press brief." Then he sat. No votes were cast, no objections raised. The support was silent but absolute. I didn't gloat, I didn't smile. Tessa hadn't moved. Her eyes stayed on the surface of the table like it might disappear if she looked away. I turned to the chairman. "I won't waste this board's time pretending this transition is clean. It isn't, but it's necessary. And it's legal. I'm not here to destroy anyone. I'm here to rebuild what this place was supposed to be before legacy blurred into entitlement." No one interrupted. I continued. "This is not a coup. This is not vengeance. This is a removal of powder from a portrait that was never accurate to begin with." Tessa flinched slightly. The chairman spoke next. "As acting chair, I confirm receipt of all legal materials and support the motion for Ms. Prescott to assume full authority under Brightcap Ventures' founding charter." He glanced toward the still empty seat across from mine. "Is Mr. Lawrence Prescott expected to join us?" "No," I said. "Why not?" "Because men like him don't show up for endings they didn't script." The chairman didn't push further. "Very well," he said. "This session will be formally recorded as the transition meeting per Article 14. Ms. Prescott, the floor is yours." I didn't say anything more. I simply opened my folder, scanned the top page of the new fiscal proposal, and began. The room was silent when I left the board meeting. Not in defeat, not in tension, just a quiet no one dared to disturb. That kind of silence doesn't ask permission. It arrives when something final has been accepted. No gavel drop, no applause, just gravity. I didn't go back to my office right away. I walked the long way through the west corridor past the old company portraits, black and white frames lined in brass meant to celebrate legacy. My grandfather's was the only one I stopped to look at. His eyes never blinked in that photo, but they never softened either. He looked as if he expected the future to misbehave and still chose to trust it. By the time I reached my office, the sun had shifted against the skyline. My inbox had over 40 new messages, most of them from compliance, legal, and staff members offering vague congratulations without saying the word congratulations. Buried between an HR policy update and a system alert was an email with no subject line and no sender name. It had one sentence. You deserve to see what they buried. Attached were 2 encrypted files. I leaned back slowly, fingers hovering over the keyboard. It didn't take much deduction. I knew who it was from. Nina Caldwell. She had been the only person in HR who ever looked me in the eye when no one else would. Years ago, she left without warning. The internal message said she'd chosen to step away for personal wellness and family relocation. That was code. Anyone with half a brain could read between the lines. I typed my decryption key. The files opened. The first was labeled T. Prescott Internal Complete. The second was Cam Prescott Archive Redacted. I opened Tessa's file first. It started clean. Polished. A cover sheet listing awards, degrees, leadership roles. Stanford, Harvard Business Online, multiple certifications. But even before I checked the metadata, I saw the inconsistencies. The formatting didn't match school record templates. One of the logos on the transcript header hadn't been in use for over a decade. The internship letters were worse. 2 came from individuals who, according to public records, had passed away before the dates listed on the letters. One reference address was traced to an empty lot in Connecticut. Then I found the pivot point. The 2014 innovation proposal. It was titled Cross-Unit Integration Framework. I knew that title. I'd written it. I had outlined that proposal during a year when I wasn't even listed on the public-facing team leadership board. I'd worked from a borrowed conference room at night, logged every interview with internal teams myself, and drafted the final report with such detail that I still remembered entire phrases by heart. But in this file, the author was listed as Tessa Prescott. The timestamp metadata was intact. Original drafter, Cam Prescott. Revision user T. Prescott. Admin approval L. Prescott. 3 names. 1 theft. I took a breath. Then opened the second file. Mine. I didn't expect it to hurt. But it did. Early awards were missing. The commendation letter from the Western Expansion Project in 2017 was gone. The bonus disbursement form tied to the merger in 2019 had been replaced with a team-wide recognition statement. The most painful omission, though, was a leadership recommendation letter from my grandfather. I remembered the day he wrote it. He printed a copy himself, signed it in blue ink, and said, "Keep this. One day someone will try to pretend you didn't lead." It wasn't in the file. There was no trace of it at all. I sat back, eyes scanning the cold administrative language stamped across my career. Adjusted. Updated. Transferred. Removed. This wasn't an oversight. It was a systematic unraveling of authorship. One keystroke at a time, they had tried to edit me out of my own story. I stood up, walked to the printer, and began printing every page. It took over 40 minutes. I let the pages stack neatly, organizing them into 2 labeled piles. One marked her fiction. One marked my record. When I finished, I took out a small frame I kept tucked in the bottom drawer, a photo of me and my grandfather. High school graduation. I was 17, braces just off, curls pulled back with a gold beret, and wearing a navy gown too big at the shoulders. He was next to me, hand resting on mine, both of us mid-laugh, looking not at the camera, but at each other. That photo had never been displayed. Until now. I placed it between the 2 files right at the center of my desk. I stared at it for a long time until the quiet inside me finally settled. I didn't need a public admission. I didn't need the world to retweet my vindication or comment with shock. What mattered had already been restored on paper, in records in fact. I didn't scream. I didn't demand applause. I simply reclaimed what had been mine all along. Not through revenge. Through proof. And proof didn't need to shout. It just needed to last. That Monday morning, the air outside the law firm felt heavier than usual, like the weather itself knew something final was about to be written. The building sat on the edge of downtown Boston, glass and steel wrapped in silence. I didn't take the elevator with anyone else. I waited until the space was empty, stepped in alone, and pressed floor 26. The conference room was simple. Polished oak table, a tray of water bottles, and a row of leather chairs arranged with surgical precision. The firm had hosted high-profile clients before tech founders' political heirs' entire boards, but this meeting didn't carry noise or cameras, just legacy. My attorney Malcolm was already seated when I entered. He looked up and gave a small nod. "We're ready when you are." I sat at the far end near the window where the light touched only half the room. Tessa arrived 5 minutes later. Her makeup was subtle this time, and her blazer hung looser on her frame like she'd lost weight quickly. She didn't speak. Just nodded politely and took the seat farthest from mine. The last to enter was Mr. Langston, the estate lawyer. He carried a sealed envelope and a leather folio and walked with the kind of pace that signaled precision, not hurry. "Thank you both for being here. This is the formal reading and execution of the amended will and corporate trust prepared by Russell Prescott, dated 3 years prior to his passing. The contents override all previous documents." He unsealed the envelope and began reading. "To Camille Prescott, I grant full and uncontested control over Brightcap Ventures, including all decision-making, authority, voting rights, equity stakes, and intellectual property protections. This designation reflects her long-standing contribution to the company's integrity, strategy, and future vision." There was no pause. No qualifying language. No ifs or contingencies. Mr. Langston continued. "To Tessa Prescott, I grant the Prescott Renewal Trust, a fund allocated for professional development, mental health care, and educational reinvestment. This is extended with the hope of clarity, healing, and accountability." Tessa's fingers curled slightly, but she didn't respond. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just nodded, a small motion, almost like surrender. There is no specific provision made for Lawrence Prescott. The letter of intent includes no mention of additional beneficiaries or extensions. The silence in the room turned cold but not cruel. Malcolm leaned forward slightly, sliding a final folder toward me. "Effective immediately, these documents register you as Brightcap's executive trustee, controlling shareholder, and brand steward. The state has already logged the change. Your corporate license and title will be updated by noon." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small silver nameplate. It was simple, engraved in clean font. "President Camille Prescott." I stared at it for a moment before taking it in both hands. There was no applause, no cameras, no press release. And yet it was the loudest moment of my career. Tessa stood first. She gathered her folder, thanked Mr. Langston in a voice just above a whisper, and walked out without looking back. Her heels didn't click as they used to. They barely made a sound. When the doors shut behind her, I stayed seated. For a long time, I didn't feel triumph. I felt clean. Like I had finally stepped out of a fog so dense I hadn't even known I was inside it. I hadn't destroyed anyone. I hadn't launched a war. I had simply taken back what was mine quietly, thoroughly, truthfully. I walked out of the conference room with the nameplate in one hand and my grandfather's photo in the other. In the lobby, the receptionist smiled as I passed. "Good morning, President Prescott." That title used to belong to someone else. Someone who built mirrors instead of doors. But now it was mine. And not because I fought louder, but because I stood longer. Outside, the city looked no different than any other day. But to me it finally looked like somewhere I belonged. Not in the background. Not in someone else's version of the story. Mine. You know, people think revenge needs to be explosive, that it has to burn down a room to feel like justice. But sometimes revenge is just the truth unburied, unedited, undeniable. Sometimes justice is a chair you no longer have to wait for, and sometimes it's just a nameplate that no one can take away. Have you ever been erased from your own story? Tell me what happened. I'd love to hear it in the comments. Let's talk.